Hello, Star Wars players. Welcome to the finals of season 13 of the TTI League, Take the Initiative. And let me first of all introduce you a little bit. So you've seen me before. My name is Wayu98, and I'm pretty new to this. And so I just running my second stream today, and I'm also running some improvements. So I want to I want to first of all talk a little bit about the league because the final stream is always the one that gets the most attention. And then I want to talk about decklists before we get to today's match. And so I'm trying a few new things here. Feel free to give me feedback of any kind. I always appreciate it. And without further ado, let's get going. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the league because the league is open to everybody. So also you can join and play, and you would be welcome to. And I've seen a couple of new names in the league already this month, which is great to see because we always need more players. The league lives and goes with its players. And so for you to join the league, I'll show you a little bit of info, but this is first of all organized through a dedicated Discord server. You can join the Discord server freely by clicking in the link on the channel description and also in any of the other streams. Tonight, I'll actually be doing a double feature. So we'll have the finals of season 13 now, and in 1.5 hours from now, we will have a top 16 match of season 14, which is the top cut that runs for this month. Season 13 top cut actually ran last month, but sometimes there's a little bit of delay of players fixing their schedules, and thus we'll have the finals of season 13, where the top cut was played mostly last month. We'll have it today. And then, as said, in 1.5 hours, we already are here with a stream of this month's Top Cut. So you can join through the Discord server, and then it's organized through the Discord and a little bit via Google Sheets. And it's played mostly through Tabletop Simulator, TTS, which is also what you will see today. And just give me 1 second, because now I'm hearing myself, which is great. I'm just muting myself. So it's great to see that the stream is actually working out. And you will notice one thing here as well, because I'm running this on a 2-minute delay. And this is important to keep competitive integrity. But that's why I was just a little bit confused, because I have my stream here running, my chat running with you. And thus I just heard myself talking, but muted that now. So run through Google Sheets and TTS. Players have increasingly been asking, are there other ways to play TTS? Because obviously there's other uh, very big ways of playing through online. Most likely you'll know about Petranaki and Karabast. And it's also possible to play through those channels in the league. Most players in the league go via TTS though, and might even prefer it. I'm also a player in the league and I prefer TTS myself, and because simply for the reason that it resembles real life play the most. I'm also playing on Petranaki and happy with that. So it's a bit of a taste, and you can also play in the league on Petranaki or on Karabast, for example. It's always then for the two players that play to agree on. But all the three ways are possible. Okay, so I'll show you a little bit the G sheets, but just for a second here. Um, so this is the current month league table. You will see that once you join the Discord, and there's all the links. I'm not going to go into detail here. There's also a match history, so you will always be able to see the past matches that happened in a month. And there's also an all-time uh, top cut participant list. And I want to use this piece of information, as the bridge for today's match, because today we have two players. And so I'll finish the TTI overview with this. I'm still mentioning this because what I want to point out is that we have two very accomplished players today in Jarol and in Dillen. And so I'll go to the bracket that led us to the finals of today. So this is the league that was played out in March, and the top cut was played out in April mostly. That's just we have the finals today. and want to talk about both players a little bit. So on the one hand, we have Jarol, the fourth seed, and you see on this bracket here that he actually started in game number 3 in round 1. He placed an IG88 yellow. There were a few issues there with one player's deck list, but still they played it out, so that's good spirits. Jarol advanced, then beat a Luke Data Vault, one of the decks of the hour, before proceeding and beating a Cat Green in the semifinals. And Dillen, on the other hand, the 10th seed, started in game number 6 and beat a Boba 4 yellow, set 4 yellow with his Sabine ECL deck, Jarol on Qi'ra green. Um, Dillen then continued to beat a Quinlan Tarkentown, and in the semifinals, a Cat Lake. He actually beat me there in the semifinals, so I wasn't able to stop Dillen. And here we are in the finals. It's today Qi'ra green versus Sabine ECL. So talking about the deck lists, this is the list by Jarol. I'll only talk about the main board. We'll talk about sideboards between the first and the second games. So what stands out in Jarol's list is, of course, what's important for the Sabine matchup, right? And cards that Qi'ra will surely look for is, for example, the Lieutenant Charleston, very strong usually in the Qi'ra matchup. Jarol will hope to be able to make it a 5-5, but ideally wants this to have a 6-6. And that's only possible, really, if he plays it on turn 3 for 4 resources without having ramped. If he gets out a Pershing before and able to draw a blue card. Other important cards is, of course, his heal. He has in heal in the main board, I see only the Vigilances and the Corvus. Corvus also a really interesting card. And of course, for Qi'ra, it's all about the flip turn. The upper end of the deck, I'm sure we won't see the Devastators, so that will probably also go out when we do sideboarding. And so let's see how that goes. Quick look at Dillen's list. So Dillen runs a Sabine very much. Actually, both decks are decks of the hour, right? So Qi'ra made an amazing run and with an amazing conversion rate in the Richmond sector qualifier, and now in Lille this past weekend, just as well. Richmond was won by a Sabine ECL. De Lille was won by a Sabine Data Vault. So Sabine seems to be on top of the meta, but it's a very wide meta. And Qi'ra, on the other hand, had the best conversion rate, as you probably know, right? And so in Dillen's deck, what's key here, I believe, let's see how he uses his ambushes and his buffs. Dillen plays 14 2-drops. And so let's see what comes up there. There's also the appropriate counters by Jarol. So, for example, Dillen doesn't want to see his Luke Skywalker in turn 1 if Jarol plays a Pike Sentinel. He doesn't want to see his Phoenix Squadron A-Wing if Jarol plays an Inferno 4. So for Jarol, those would be the best counters. But actually, I don't believe Jarol has ideal counters against Battlefield Marine and Green Squadron A-Wing. So let's see what happens there. Maybe also a space unit can be buffed by R2. Other than that, the list, let's watch out for the Dodonna. Let's watch out for the Fighters for Freedom, which should be amazing in beating Kira's shields because he's Saboteur. Also, 3 Darksabers in Dillen's deck and also in Jarol's deck. I believe there's no upgrade removal. So without further ado, let's get going. I give the players the go-ahead. And players already rolled the dice and drew their starting hands. So Dillen started with a Sabine on the ground. Jarol didn't have a 2-drop, so nothing to play in round 1. Also, Dillen had won the initiative, so starts with a Sabine, which I think is always a really good play. Also, you will notice that I've chosen the top-down view here this time in TTS. So I hope this is for a better experience for you guys. Give me feedback on that, please. And by the way, also one more piece of information about the delay. So whenever you write something in the chat, I will already be 2 minutes advanced. So therefore, you will talk in real time to each other when you see this. However, kind of I'm already ahead by 2 minutes when I see anything that you write. Jarol answers with a power, which is probably the best he could have done at this point, at this stage. And Dillen keeps pinging with the Sabine leader and also plays Fighters for Freedom. So Fighters for Freedom, as said, very good unit. Probably Jarol will now think what he does. Because Jarol didn't do a turn one play, I said he can only get to a 6/6 Charleston if he um, gets out at Pershing. That's obviously not true. If he also passes through one of the first turns, naturally, most likely turn one, he'll also have usually four other cards on hand. He's now resourcing next to the Charleston. So for him, that's going to be blue cards, and then he can play Charleston becoming a 5/5. But Fighters for Freedom is a saboteur. And so here Jarol was thinking about what to resource. He keeps the Snoke, which is an 8 drop, and resources a No Glory rather, which I find a very interesting choice because No Glory is kind of Qi'ra's only answer to Chewbacca, which, however, Dillen doesn't have on hand, but Jarol doesn't know that. And so Jarol plays a power against the Fighters for Freedom, which I find very interesting. I might have, I would have probably rather expected the Charleston there, but he goes for the power, gets rid of the Fighters for Freedom. They would have also been able to get around the Sentinel of Charleston, so maybe good choice. But now with Jarol playing two cards and now keeping the first green card on his hand in the overwhelming barrage, and if he now plays a Charleston, it will only be a 4/4 and not a 6/6 anymore. So that was interesting lines of play. Dillen answered on the removal of the fighters with another Fighters for Freedom, and he now has kind of the best options in hand that Sabine can have in a turn four, with a Poe and then potentially two Wreckers thereafter. And he still has ECL, and Jarol was again thinking what to resource. I didn't catch the card that he's now putting down. I think there was a second Charleston, right? So he's putting down one Charleston, and let's see what happens now. So also we've reached the flip turn for Jarol. Jarol, however, decides to go for the Charleston instead of the barrage play. So he's very much in danger of, he needs a target to play the barrage with good purpose. And this way, he's actually ensuring that he can get Qi'ra out without Dillen being able to directly counter her, and thus Jarol should have a barrage target next turn in Qi'ra. So that was probably a good play. None of Dillen cards are able to remove Charleston straight, even though it's only a 4/4. Dillen doesn't have a buff, so he might actually wish that he had some kind of buff here, but he probably also wants to get out the Poe this this phase. And so this is a really interesting board state. Let's see how Dillen responds to the 4/4. Again, usually Qi'ra against the Sabine wants to have at least a 5/5 Charleston, but as things lie here, the 4/4 Charleston actually is just doing enough. So Jarol has two potential options. He can either give a shield to the Hylobon, or he can flip Qi'ra, which is probably what he intended to before, because he wanted to have Qi'ra as an OB target for the next action phase. I'm pretty sure. Let's see how he responds to this. Dillen went for 3 damage and thus decided to durdle a little bit. And Jarol decides to give a shield to Charleston. That's also a good play because it gets Dillen into more trouble still. He can ping away the shield with the R2, or also with the Sabine, of course. But since it's the leader unit, Sabine's built-in one ping can't be dealt to unit, but would go to base. It's different from the Sabine unit. What what Dillen can do, and he thinks about that right now for sure, is he can ECL the Poe, and with Poe's ability, he can discard a card from hand and remove an upgrade, and thus could be the shield on Charleston, and thus he would be able to remove Charleston in one go with Poe, but then thereafter, due to Sabine and R2 only threatening a total of 3 hit points, he wouldn't be able to remove a Qi'ra after the flip. So Dillen is really in a bit of a dilemma here and decides to ping the shield away with R2. I think that was probably the right move because this also allows him. I think he got his line back because now Dillen can actually kill the Charleston with Sabine, but Sabine would die as well. Jarol is in a position that he can, following whatever Dillen now does, or Dillen decides to ECL at this point in time. That's probably the right play because that way um, Dillen could even use the Poe to kill both. No, he can't. I'm not talking right here. He needs to get rid of the Charleston first because Poe would only be able to attack into the Charleston and then the Qi'ra would be free. What's he gonna do? Yeah, you can see the thinking here involved. So both players taking some time for their turns, aware that this is probably the turning point of the game. So he pings one with Fighters for Freedom because it's a red card. Decides to discard one card from his hand, kill the Hylobon, which has a bounty of draw a card. Thus, he just drew a card, and then he runs the Poe into the Charleston, and now Jarol can either claim so that he's able to start with a 6 hit point barrage, which would almost clear the board next action phase, first thing. Not entirely. One unit would remain with 1 hit point because Dillen's units currently have 7 hit points as things stand. And all Dillen would be able to do if he gets another action, I believe Dillen would have preferred for Jarol to actually attack with Qi'ra into something. Didn't do that. So, but Dillen has potentially a wrecker to answer. Also, the Fleet Lieutenant that Dillen just drew into helps. Jarol has some heal here on hand in 2 vigilances that gives him some buffer. So I would actually dare to say that the board state doesn't look bad for Jarol. However, Sabine so often has something up her sleeve, and you don't see it coming. So let's see what happens next. First of all, the barrage for 6 damage. And so Jarol decides to go and kill the Poe, which is the biggest threat on the board, and then also the fighters, which would keep pinging. Um, Sabine Qi'ra now is a 6/6, and thus, if Dillen now answers with the Wrecker and decides to discard a card from his resource row, he wouldn't be able to kill Qi'ra. Qi'ra would only die after the action phase when the overwhelming barrage effect goes away. And so Dillen is again thinking. With the Fleet Lieutenant, the same thing. If he attacks with Fleet Lieutenant into the Qi'ra, then um, Qi'ra would only die after the action phase, but also Dillen is very aware that he's the beatdown here and thus should be going for base. So he decides to do that and does 5 damage to base. And Jarol in return kills the Sabine leader, which makes Qi'ra a 6/2 after the barrage goes away, which would allow Dillen with the Wrecker deploy to kill Qi'ra first thing next action. And that's why he takes initiative here, I'm pretty sure. So Jarol draws a Devastator. let's see whether I will actually be held untrue here, and whether we will see a Devastator played. But it would be one of the first games of a Qi'ra against Sabine ECL matchup where I see a 10 resource card played. But never say never. And Dillen had two options here, right? To kill Qi'ra, but again, he decides he's not the control, he is the aggro, he is the beatdown, and so he will just get his damage in and does three more damage with the Fleet Lieutenant. He's also, Jarol is going to be very aware that there's often so many aces up Sabine's sleeves. Cards such as Farsibi, and also there's cards on hand because Dillen is able to time the intervention. That's what he's doing now. He's gonna timely intervention. He's not. He will just kill Sabine. He could have timely interventioned, and Sabine had only um, two hit points, so it would have been five overwhelm. But Jarol used the vigilance well there, so it's quite some way to go before Dillen would be able to get the game, and thus instead of also discarding the wrecker here, he decides to only use the wrecker effect and get rid of Qi'ra. Wow, this is a great game so far. Interesting lines by both players. I think Dillen didn't have the starting hand that he had wished for. There was no Fleet Lieutenant to start with, for example. And now we're at 8 resources, and Jarol indeed plays the Snoke that he kept on hand earlier when he decided to resource the No Glory instead. Wrecker only going for 5 damage, but Jarol answers by claiming immediately after his deploy. He has used all resources, and Dillen plays 2 more units that are both -2/-2. So the Battlefield Marine is now a 1/1. Andor is a 1/3. Thus, the attack by Andor only made 1 more damage. However, now he's very close. And actually, Jarol is not aware, of course, but he should be playing the Vigilance. That's his only out because, oh no, it's not. I'm again not looking right because the Rebel Assault does work only on Rebels and Wrecker is not a Rebel. So Jarol plays it safe here, eliminates the Wrecker, and Dillen is slowly out of options. Plays a Rebel Assault. Hang on. Yes. Actually, I'm not entirely aware whether the Snoke effects last until the end of the action phase. Not the end of the action phase, the end of that battle between the 2 units. So Jarol added damage as the Snoke already went away. So he counted the Cassian Andor as a 3/5 again, and then +1/+0 from the Rebel Assault instead of a 1/3. The players are not asking, so I hope that's the right play. Now, Jarol again knows that he has to be careful. The only thing he can do, he feeds with his vigilance, is mill, which is not usually something you would do. You want to remove a unit. There's one that Jarol could have removed, but he didn't have one earlier, and he wanted to probably afraid, of course, of, for example, for a cause I believe in, which would have killed Jarol there, up to 4 direct damage directly from hand to base. And so he decided for the safe play, didn't know, well, decided that the second best option on his vigilance besides the heal was the will. That's something you don't see often in this matchup. Jarol draws his ultimate out, the Super Laser Blast. I believe Dillen hasn't seen a single for a cause. Wow. Jarol thinks he doesn't need the Super Laser Blast. Interesting. Dillen has some nice options here on hand. Jarol, but he decides to keep the Super Laser Blast. He also can just kill the Masterpiece with Count Dooku. That's probably what he's gonna do here, I would guess. Jarol is now in 4 course range. I'm sure he's aware, but there's nothing he can do. So he just play what he can play. He removes the Masterpiece, and indeed, Dillen doesn't have any way to kill Qi'ra just this turn. This is an amazing match, guys. Nice grinding by both players. Jarol now immediately has to claim because otherwise Dillen can claim and just ping Jarol to death. And Jarol needs um, a heal here. Otherwise, only the Sabine ping will kill him next turn. And now Dillen has put so many units down that there's probably no out for Jarol. Wow. This is game one, and look what a game one it was. It didn't look good for Dillen, in between. However, he played to his outs and got the job done. Amazing play by both players. Also, really interesting to see that Jarol's decision to keep the Snoke actually was a good one. GG's to both. So I'll quickly talk about deck lists and sideboarding, I mean. So this is Jared's list again. Looking at his sideboard, I'm pretty sure he'll want to bring in more heal. So he'll for sure go for the 3 top targets and maybe also the upgrade, Devotion. The other cards I find unlikely. And he will probably side out the Devastators, I would think. And on Dillen's side, Dillen might go for the Chewbaccas for sure. They are kind of his best cards. Players are getting started again, so I move over. I move over straight away so that you see this. So Dillen just took a mulligan. Jarol still thinking about it. So on Dillen's sideboard, I'm sure he'll bring in the Chewbaccas. Other cards now I don't have on the top of my mind. Fighters for Freedom, I think that's a very good card against Qi'ra because of the Saboteur aspect. So he might bring in the 3rd fighter. And he might bring in the Confiscates to counter Jarol's top targets. That surely Dillen is expecting Jarol to side in. So, Jarol with the initiative gets it going with the Hylobon and decides to give it a shield. Dillen had one option as a 2-drop, and the A-Wing is his choice. He draws his first Farsibi of the matchup, the first 4 course, in short Farsibi, and decides to get rid of the Hylobon here and use the bounty effect and draw a card. Players are going quick here. I like it. Jarol decides to go for the ramp also in lack of other options. So this early game looks much more like what a Sabine usually wants to see in this kind of matchup. However, the ramp obviously gives Jarol quicker access to his leader, quicker access to cards such as Overwhelming Barrage, most likely, but also a No Glory that he just drew. However, Jarol also has the top target, but the top target won't be of his of best utility here, because if he plays a top target on an enemy's unit and then he won't be able to do it this turn with 5 resources, but then uses the no glory on that unit, he won't be able to claim the bounty. And so these are not the best synergies for Qi'ra. He resources his reinforcement walker as the 8-drop, and I'm sure Jarol is aware that his focus should be on managing the next few turns. Usually for Qi'ra, the flip turn is game decisive, especially in this kind of matchup. And so Jarol is able to do it earlier than usually. Also, he doesn't have to fear that Dillen is going to come down with a Poe or Wrecker. Also, ECL is already gone. So he decides to play his Rebel Assault, giving Qi'ra 4 damage from the Fighters for Freedom because they get +1/+0, and does 4 damage to the base along the way. Very good play here by Dillen, and Jarol's only option is to use his 5 resources on the No Glory and get rid of the A-Wing that way. Game 2 is very much under Dillen's control, I'm afraid to say. So let's see how both players continue. Jarol drew into Lieutenant Charleston, which is again one of his best cards against Sabine, but he needs blue cards for that. So he might think whether he really wants to get rid of a blue card, because Charleston again will only be a 4/4 here if he does that. Um, but he probably wants to keep the Vader for next turn. And so down comes the Charleston as a 4/4. Dillen decides to buff both the existing units, and that means that the Sabine unit is actually able to kill the Charleston, and thus playing the top target on the Sabine unit would have now healed Jarol 6 health. He decides to play it on the Dodonna though, and thus the Charleston is gone, and Sabine is able to go for 4 damage to base. There's the Vader. Jarol hopes to draw into his outs here, and there's lots to choose from. There's a Death Trooper, which, however, doesn't kill any of the units on board, but he can use them in conjunction with Vader, but doesn't need to do that. The ambush is enough for him to kill the Dodonna, heal for 6. And this is one of the nicest things about the Vader pull, right? That he's actually able to get two units or even 3 units as long as their cost in total doesn't exceed 3. So nice pulls and also nice play by Jarol here. The 6 health, the 6 heal from the top target also was amazing, obviously. And Dillen would now actually probably have loved to see a wrecker here. Let's see which cards he puts on top from the 4 cores. He keeps the U-Wing, aware that next turn he can actually use it. We are approaching 7 resources. There it is. And thus, that way he might be able to get the wrecker and would be able to kill both of Jarol's units on board and do some additional overwhelm damage to base. So U-Wing is a nice play. Also, Jarol has a second Vader. Thus, he doesn't mind wasting him into Sabine. The leader should go to the leader pile, but I'm sure players will pick that up soon. Sometimes you just believe your units go to the discard pile, including the leader unit. Happens to me as well. Happened to many of you, I assume. And so Dillen goes for the wing leader on the Sabine leader unit and now plays the Poe. Vader's gun. Another Vader pull. Jarol is very nicely able to stabilize here. Let's see what he pulls out of the Vader. His options are by far not as good as they were with the first Vader. So Pershing or Super Laser Tech. No second unit, no Helobon Enforcer to pull alongside the Pershing. Decides to ambush into the Poe. Poe is still alive though, and pull is always a huge threat because Jarol doesn't have Sentinel out, but it wouldn't matter because Jarol uses the Helobon to finish off the Poe. So Dillen only has one rebel unit on board and one unit in total. So rebel assault is not his best choice here. He goes for the U-wing and hopes to pull into something nice. There is a wrecker. There is a Chewbacca as well. He could bring out the Chewbacca together with a 2-drop, as in the Battlefield Marine or the A-wing. He wouldn't be able. So he decides to go for 5 for the damage boost of +2/+0 with the Fleet Lieutenant and pulls 3 units in total. Yeah, you want immediate impact on the board, right? And that's what he was able to produce with the Fleet Lieutenant and wouldn't have been able to produce with one of the bigger units. So Dillen goes for a little bit more of Swarm. Gets to 9 remaining hit points on Jarol's base. I quickly check the chat. I see that you guys have been writing something. Okay, Jackson, I see your question for the TTI Discord. It's in the YouTube channel page of the TTI. Also, the Discord server is just called Take the Initiative. And there's a second stream later today in about 1 hour from now, actually just 45 minutes from now. In that second stream, the link for the Discord is placed. This one, we missed it. But you should be able to find the Discord easily that way. So, back to the game. Jarol drew his out in the barrage and was able to clear the board. And also still has heal in his vigilance, has another Vader, should come in handy, can anytime lock down the ground. And also Dillen Jarol has the ideal counter to K2 on his hand. In No Glory only results. Dillen decides to wisely play the the K2 as a direct overwhelm suicide into Vader, who had only 1 hit point. Thus, 3 overwhelm from K2 plus 3 damage from the K2 ability. Bring Jarol within 2. Jarol now thinking what he needs to do. He's again aware if Dillen has it for a cause, he can't play it this phase anymore. Thus, he decides to go for Pershing. He needs to be careful that he is able to directly counter anything that Dillen plays. Dillen thus goes for the ping. Jarol needs to do something because otherwise Jarol would be able to just no, Dillen would be able to just claim and then ping Jarol to death. So Jarol now wisely kept the super laser technician as a unit with which he can do an action because he can kill the Luke with the super laser tech and play the resupply, which is his only last action, but that probably he won't necessarily do. He might actually. Let's see. Let's see how Jarol replies to the super laser tech. He can also just claim and play the Lieutenant Charleston first action, but he decides to get rid of what he can get rid of. Another really good game here. As I said, both players very accomplished. I'll say a few words on both just before I end the stream. I wanted to do that at the beginning, but I don't want to shift focus from this game now. Yep, Jarol resources the resupply instead of playing it, and now still has options. Dillen needs to re-establish his board or hope for 2/4 cause. His timely intervention is gone. I think he had only 1 in his deck list. So Dillen won't be able to ambush again this game. I think it's fair to say Jarol has stabilized, and Pershing also helps him a great deal here to continue to build his options in drawing more cards. I'll actually switch the light on so that I won't be in the total dark. He decides to go for Pershing, draws into long pike. Riders for Freedom surely is a good choice here because it would go around any sentinel that Jarol might be able to play. But of course, Jarol can also has several outs against the Fighters for Freedom. No Glory, Power, and Vader all kill him directly. Let's see what Dillen says to this because he is typing something. Third Vader, yeah, that's very true. I'm sure Jarol is happy about that, and rightly so. That's what you want to see in this situation. Still one of the best cards in the game. So Jarol's options to pull out of his Vader only one unit. He doesn't have Hylobon Enforcer there again. Decides to go for the Inferno 4 and cycles through his deck further. Let's see what he pulls. He doesn't pull. Let's see. We won't actually be able to see. I don't want to interfere with the players here. He keeps one deck on top and one on bottom. So with one card, he was happy. Might be a heal, giving him further buffer. There comes down a Caspian from the resource row, so it's ready. However, Jarol has another out and plays a power. And thus very much has stabilized now. This is the first Dark Saber that we see. Some of the cards are finally showing up for Dillen. But at this point, with no units on board, Dillen decides that that doesn't make sense to keep on hand. So Dillen brings down the Wrecker. Discards the Master Priest from his resource row to kill the Vader, the third Vader. No more Vaders in Jarol's deck, that much for sure. Wrecker is a dangerous card for Jarol to have on board, or to have on board against him. He could again play No Glory. He doesn't know what else Dillen has on hand. With three resources, there's always something he can play, and Dillen's next play probably will be the masterpiece if he doesn't ping with Sabine. So Jarol decides to increase his options again. And now Jarol also knows what he's up against with Dillen all exhausted. And that was probably just what he waited for. A nice target for Vigilance, so Jarol can kill the 3 hit point unit and heal 5. Dillen things 1, and now slowly Dillen is getting close to his 25 hit points on his ECL base. And thus, now Jarol is very close to pulling this off. So I see we have just about 50 viewers in the stream. That's great to see. As I said at the very beginning, think about joining the league yourself. We would always be happy to see new players, just in case you aren't there already. So, Dillen 4-5. is aware that his options are limited here. No glory for Jarol anymore. Otherwise, he could use that to ping 3 damage directly to Dillen's base via the K2. Jarol might actually be thinking about getting out the Corvus here, just to have some more restore on the board, making sure he stays in control. Dillen with 5 more resources. Jarol decides to go for the Snoke. And so the K2 becomes a 2-2, which Dillen could use to his advantage and just suicide the K2 into the super laser tech. However, as things stand, Jarol will be able to push it to 24. Thus, Dillen can't use the Sabine ping anymore. He would suicide himself. And there is an Cassian Endor, which is now just 1-3 again, as in game 1. Yeah. And Dillen decides to scoop. Played like hell, I'll say. GG again to both players. And we're going for game 3. I won't go back to sideboarding. We've seen it. Also, both players aren't changing anything. And so let's get into game 3 straight away and see what players decide to resource. Dillen decides to keep his hand, has 1/2 drop, and sees the Darksaber finally. So Dillen could go for a straight 2/3/4 drop line here with the Phoenix Squadron A-Wing into Fighters for Freedom and the Darksaber, but he's also thinking whether he should really keep to that. Jarol also drew a nice curve here. 2 green cards, which don't help his Charleston. And the other 2 blue cards that he keeps on hand are probably going to be played before the Charleston gets out. Or he decides to, I don't know, first of all, 1 more resource. That makes sense. And off we go. Dillen starts with the A-Wing, draws into a Fleet Lieutenant. That's probably what he was looking for. Jarol doesn't have initiative, so Dillen would for sure be able to get his Fleet Lieutenant for 5 with the Phoenix Squadron A-Wing in and get 5 damage to Jarol's base, get a head start here. One of the typical Sabine lines. And Jarol thinks of what to resource. Overwhelming Barrage, of course, is an amazing card for him. He just needs a unit to play it on, right? And that is what Sabine always will try to make certain that it doesn't happen. He decides to resource a Charleston. So the Charleston, if he plays Charleston next turn, it would only be a 3/3 as things stand. Dillen decides to play the Chewbacca on the Phoenix Squadron. That's a great play. Dillen is aware that there's no upgrade removal in Jarol's deck, and so now the Phoenix Squadron A-Wing is a 6/6, no 6/5 actually, but does 6 damage to base. Can't be removed with power. So Dillen is able to put Jarol into a real tough spot here. The power of the dark side is now a useless card. And Jarol needs another way to get rid of the Phoenix Squadron A-Wing, and he's aware. So an barrage on the Death Trooper would be able to take out the Phoenix Squadron A-Wing. However, for that, he needs 5 resources. Isn't there yet. So as I see things, Jarol isn't able to do anything against the Phoenix Squadron A-Wing this action phase. And so Dillen will be able to build his lead and has more threats on hand. There's another Fleet Lieutenant, and there is the Darksaber. Those are probably the 2 options for Dillen. Jarol hopes to draw one out here, but unsuccessful in doing so. The Reinforcement Walker is a great card, but you don't want to see him at this stage of the game. Looking at the chat again, yes, I agree. Amazing set so far. So Jarol goes for the Charleston, his only 4 resource play that he was able to do. Dillen kills the Charleston with the Dark Saber Sabine and goes for 1 ping from Sabine onto the base. So Jarol already at 15 damage, and Dillen in a very commanding situation here. He can also, whatever Jarol decides to do now, if Jarol flips, Dillen can immediately answer by, well, actually, he would suicide the Sabine if he decides to attack into Qi'ra with the Sabine. But one thing more certain, well, Jarol could play an early barrage here and get rid of the Phoenix Squadron A-Wing. But then he would need to eat the 7 damage by Sabine and would already be at 22. An old saying goes, if you take 2 hits from Darksaber, that's one too many in order to be able to still win. However, with all the heal that Jarol has in his deck, let's see how he takes this. He can, of course, also barrage the Darksaber Sabine on the Death Trooper, but then he would eat the 6 damage from the Phoenix Squadron A-Wing. If he damages the Phoenix Squadron A-Wing, he will actually be able to play the power again, and with this Death Trooper, he is also able to take out the Sabine. So Dillen, on the other hand, is probably now thinking, should he Fleet Lieutenant the Sabine and thus boost Sabine to from 6 to 8 hit power and then another ping, so he would be able to get Jarol to 24. But he is very aware that Sabine would die in return. He would be able to ECL the Fleet Lieutenant. ECL the Fleet Lieutenant into the. Yeah, that's what he's doing. I'm pretty sure. Yes. So he goes for the Fleet Lieutenant attack of 8. Oh, is it 8? Is it 9? It's 9, yeah. Into the base and take out the boosted Death Trooper. So Sabine stays, and thus Jarol needs to flip and suicide his Qi'ra into the Sabine. Or if Jarol now claims and plays that barrage onto both units, Sabine has 4 hit points remaining, so that's 1 too little. But if he doesn't do that, then he has no unit to play a barrage on. He could also claim and play the Pike Sentinel to have to have his Sentinel in place, but that wouldn't. Well, it would probably get him some advantage. Ah, nice play by Jarol. He ups the Qi'ra. Oh, did I count this wrong? Ah, now because Dillen claimed, he had to go that route. If Dillen would have taken another action, so Dillen responded in the right way. Jarol's play was up the Qi'ra to 5 hit points, then claim, and then do a 7 hit point barrage. Dillen probably saw through that, didn't go for the Sabine ping, which I believe was still open, but claimed immediately. So Jarol understood that he needs to answer by suiciding the Qi'ra into the Sabine. Now Dillen can do 3 to base, but not finish Jarol off just this turn. And Jarol is already Again, very close to his deck's demise here. Let's see whether he's able to stabilize and pull this around. Last game, he did this amazingly well. And it's not uncommon for a Qi'ra to be close to the last hit point on their base. He draws into one of his outs, but the top target on the battlefield marine will only heal for 4 here. He Dillen comes down with a wrecker, sacrifices another wrecker from resource row to take out the Pershing, and now Jarol has only 6 resources. He can't play top target on. He could make the Charleston a 4/4, 6/6, but by showing 4 blue cards. That's exactly the blue cards that he has. And so if Dillen runs into the Charleston with the wrecker, still 1 overwhelm would go to base. But now for sure, Jarol will play the top target onto the wrecker. And he's able to give a shield to Qi'ra. So this is now where Charleston shines. This is exactly the Charleston that you want. Jarol is able to both put the top target onto the wrecker and give Charleston a shield and 2 damage. Thinking about what he's doing here. This is a great play by Jarol. Exactly the out that he was looking for. So drawing into the top target with a Pershing here. Exactly what you love to see. Well done there. And into the next action phase. Now Dillen with the initiative. For example, would he have drawn into a 4 course? He would have had lethal here. It's all a game of ifs and whens. But he didn't. And so he needs to do with the units on the ground. The heroic sacrifice provides a boost here. Also, a suicide by the K2 would be able to give him the 3 damage to Jarol's base that he still needs to go. However, no timely intervention. I believe. Does he have a timely in his resource row? I can't check. I don't want to check. I don't want to interfere with the game state here, as I said, because I think players would see my cursor and thus see that I'm checking for things that could give away clues. So I don't want to do that. If Dillen had a timely intervention in his resource row here, he would have been able to win the game by ambushing K2 into the Charleston. But that didn't happen, so apparently no timely, I believe. Jarol doesn't know about any of that, of course. But Jarol is able to turn the corner otherwise here. So Dillen decides to suicide the battlefield marine into the Charleston to ping off the shield. And Jarol takes that opportunity to make great use of the power and kills the wrecker with the power and is thus able to claim the 6 heal bounty of top target on the wrecker and goes back down to 21 health. There we go. Just what I mentioned. Jarol was able to turn the corner here. Let's see how much more pressure Dillen will be able to add onto this. Goes into the K2. And Jarol still has different options because the K2 would suicide into the Charleston and do 3 more damage to Jarol's base. Dillen is out of options for this turn, also with the heroic sacrifice and K2's overwhelm. That often helps, however, not against the Charleston. If Jarol plays the Pike Sentinel here, it would actually help Dillen a lot. Let's see whether he does another play, either the Pershing or the Pike. The Pershing helped him greatly in the end game, in game 2. And he can't put the shield anymore onto the Pike this turn, which would prevent Dillen's overwhelm. This is really an amazing set of games, I have to say as well. Already heads off to both players. Jarol is typing something, pondering his options. Yeah, hard decisions. I couldn't agree more. Also, the Qi'ra doesn't have the token on that it just to mark that it had been deployed already, right? But both players, of course, know. Nevertheless, and so Jarol could give Charles another shield. That's what he's thinking about for sure, which would also prevent any overwhelm, but only until as long as the shield is on. If he does that and he thus lowers Charles' hit points from 4 to 2, whatever Dillen is able to do to get off the shield would then allow him to do more overwhelm with K2. He decides to go for the Pike Sentinel. That's an opening for Dillen because Dillen can do 3 overwhelm from K2 using the heroic sacrifice via the Peg Sentinel because the active player can choose which Sentinel to attack if the opponent has more than one Sentinel out. However, it's not enough. The cushion through the top target that Jarol was able to regain earlier, the 6 heal, is able to allows Jarol to ponder his options here and have a little bit of a buffer. So this is another really tight game. Jarol also just drew into his next out with the Vigilance. Also, he actually has 2 cards on hand now to be able to heal. The Vigilance and the Reinforcement Walker. Both cards would have an immediate heal effect. Dillen probably didn't draw into what he would love to see. Yeah, he goes for the heroic sacrifice play. Also helps him because he hang on. The Charleston was on 2 hit points. What am I not seeing? No, it was on 4 hit points. So I believe it was too overwhelmed, so I'm interfering. I believe it should have been 2. He was at 21. He actually added 5. Am I not seeing something? Oh, the 3 damage from K2. Yes, that's why 5. Okay, here we go. So all correct. So I was a mistake here. I forgot I was still all about the resolution of the battle. Wow, because Dylan would now have been able to take out Jarol by playing the 4 cores and hoping that he draws 4 heroism cards, but chances are pretty high for him. I think he has 4 cards which are not heroism in his deck, the 1 timely and 3 Darksabers, in case he didn't sideboard them out, but I don't believe so because he knew that Jarol didn't have any upgrade hate. So Jared plays exactly the right card, also probably knowing that that's the danger that that Dylan has a 4 cores on hand, and thus the 4 cores doesn't do what Dylan does need here. And now Jarol thinking he still has a vigilance, so Jarol will be able to play the vigilance if he now claims heal for 5 and take out one of those 2 space units. Not sure what Jarol is considering, hesitating to do. He will also heal 3 by attacking with the Walker. And once the Walker lies, as things stand here, with Dylan not having a ground presence, the Walker probably is going to be a dominant force that Dylan will have great trouble getting rid of. So Jarol claims, Dylan decides to ping. First ping in a long time, I believe. And Jarol draws into another um, another card that's great for him. Ooh, there's options again. So Jarol can't use the no glory on a top targeted unit that we already talked about earlier, I believe. Dillen has the wing leader. So if Jarol is now going too big and decides to play the top target onto the Sabine's masterpiece and hope that he can then remove it with the vigilance, Dillen would be able to counter that with the wing leader. And so let's see what Jarol goes for. Either attack with the Walker or direct vigilance would be two outs. Or he maybe believes his 6 hit point cushion on base is enough, and he doesn't need to worry further about it. He can also just get rid of Dillen's board by playing a barrage on the Walker. So that's what he decides for. Barrage on the Walker for 8 kills both of Dillen's space units. Now he doesn't have a target for wing leader. So he will either go for the 4 cores, which is at most 4 damage to Gerald's base and thus not lethal, or he goes for the U wing. But he knows that Jarol has an 8 attack Walker out. So actually, Jarol has lethal on board now, right? Yes. So Dillen is aware of that. Jarol is threatening 12 damage as things stand, and ECL can take only another 11, and then it's over for Dillen. So Dillen needs an out here. What's he looking at? Not what he needs, I'm afraid. So he could bring down a 2 drop and a 5 drop, the Poe, and then the Sabine unit or an A wing. He could bring down a K2. It's also very dangerous to do, as he knows that Jarol is playing 3 no glories in his deck. I'm not sure Dillen has an out here. And Jarol attacks to base here for 8. He can heal another 3, which is what he does, giving him a good cushion again. And Jarol can just kill off Dillen at this point and call it a game. So, wow. Congratulations to Jarol. Amazing victory. What a tight set of games. This also took really long. So, very well done to both players. This is was an amazing set of games. GG's to both. I don't want to stretch the stream much longer. I'll just wrap this up by explaining about both players what I wanted to do before I started or at the start of the stream. So I mentioned that both players are very accomplished in the league, have been both been um, in many months getting the highest count of games in. So you can play as many games as you want in a month when you join the league. Just the first 8 count for the qualification for the following month's top cut. Um, and both players, as I said, running with a lot of games, often lots of practice, use that to their advantage. And both recently did a structural change of a little bit. Dillen joined Team Enigma, was one of the founding members of Team Enigma not long ago, and Jarol started his own YouTube channel. So, as if I remember correctly, that's Jarol Swoo. Check it out. And in Team Enigma started their own Discord server. You can also check that out. It's free to join. And all the Enigma members are available also for chat there. So again, amazing set of games. GG's to both players. And we could see us again in 8 minutes. So it's only 8 minutes to go until the top 16 game of season 4 that I'm going to stream. So I'll take a quick break here. Um, Again, amazing games. Thanks to both and you for following. And I'll close with Rebel Trader and say always remember to take the initiative.